Okay, so this is my Holocaust survivor activity. I chose the interview by Sally Levinstein. She was interviewed by Sidney Langler in 1983, and the credit line was United States Holocaust Memorial Museum collection, gift of the Holocaust Resource Center at Kean University. So, uh, pre-war home and community. Sally was born in the suburbs of Krakow, Poland, in a town called Kazimierza Wielki. So, 200 to 300 Jewish people lived in her community, and about 70 to 80,000 Jewish people lived in the city of Krakow. So she lived in, like, she was born in the Kaza town, but she had houses in both the city and in the suburbs. She was the youngest child of eight. She had four sisters and three brothers. Her father bought large amounts of land to portion off and resell. So he would buy large, like she said, hundreds of acres of land and resell it for a little bit of a raised price to make money back and use that land to live on and have different houses all over Poland. She attended public school to the seventh grade before going to gymnasium, she called it, in Krakow, which is actually like a school that prepares students for college, so basically like high school. She finished school in 1929 and got married shortly after, and she worked for the Jewish National Fund. Um, she had two kids. Her and her husband had an apartment. Her husband owned a factory. Um, Growing up, she had private Jewish teachers, and her mom even taught Jewish studies at her home. So she was someone who's very involved in this Jewish community in Krakow, Poland. Pre-war, she says the Polish and Jewish community had a great relationship. She said there was, the Gentiles and the Polish and the Jewish all were very well mixed in public school, and there was no problems before the war. Um, Summary of wartime experiences. She said the beginning was shocking. She didn't believe the anti-Semitism. They heard of what was going on in Germany, but she just couldn't believe it. Like the guards cutting off women's breasts and cutting off men's penises and all these gross shooting men in the streets. She just couldn't believe it, taking all of their possessions. She heard it. She said she heard it from people who knew what was happening, but she just could not believe it. Um, Experiencing betrayal. She had a sister, so during the war, her sister was pretty well off, and her husband owned a factory. Well, her and her husband owned the factory, and when the war started, a family had told her sister that they would hide her during the war as long as she paid her, she paid them, and the cost that she set for her sister was so high that all of her belongings, her dress, her money was gone in 3 to 4 days. After those 3 to 4 days, where she had no more possessions or money to give to this woman for hiding her, she re- almost instantaneously reported them to the SS. She got everything she needed out of them and then reported them right away. I mean, that's just sick. That's devious. Like, who does that? Like, it's just hard to believe that these are normal people who just turn just like that. That the government can, that the Nazi propaganda just like fills their mind, and it's amazing. And in 1941, possessions and businesses were taken. Her husband lost his factory that he had. Um, all the Jewish businesses were taken. She was put in the Polish ghetto in Krakow. There was three. So when she originally first got into the ghetto, it was just her family living in a small two-bedroom apartment, and then eventually another family was put in her ghetto. So there's one family, one apartment, next another family, another. Her family was in the main bedroom because of the because they were the first ones there, and then they put a doctor and his family in that apartment as well. Since he was a doctor, they took over to the main bedroom, so her family had to sleep on the kitchen floor. Just her family just gathered around the kitchen, and that was their living space, and they had to share the kitchen with the other two families as well. um So while she was in the ghetto, she was forced to make stockings for the German soldiers, and every like so often, the SS would come around and take around 500 people. They have a name listed, and they would be taken away to concentration camps. Um, before she got before when it was her turn to go, she actually had a woman hide her children, but she said the woman hid her children for 14 months for free for nothing, but she doesn't really talk more about her children because they go to a concentration camp and she never hears of them anymore. So that's kind of sad. It's very sad, but moving on, she spent time in Birkenau and Auschwitz concentration camps. In, in Auschwitz. Well, she first arrives at Birkenau and talks about the living conditions and how horrible it was. They literally would just make them pick up huge stones and just carrying them for miles for no reason. And if you were stopped or took a break, you were just shot. Talked about it, how when they first got there, they were just stripped of their possessions, um, forced. I was trying to call it forced to strip naked, stripped of everything, given one small dress, and forced to go outside in these cruel, cruel winters and just work in absolutely no clothing. People got sick. People were dying. It was just crazy. She talks about when she arrives at Auschwitz, she literally recalls seeing Joseph Mengele. She said he made everyone strip down before they get in the shower, and they walk in a straight line. And he, based on characteristics, he would tell you go to the left or the right side. And she knew the right side, or she knew which side was bad. You know, you could tell what kind of people he was sending to other side. You know, deformed or had or something wrong with them. So, you know, it's just crazy to think about. And she talks about the number on her arm that she got from Auschwitz. You know, she had the tattoo number on there, and how Auschwitz there's a little bit better conditions than Birkenau, still horrible, but liberation, survival, and post-war. She said the Russian forces actually got to Auschwitz before anyone in 1944, and they basically forced these marchers, excuse me, on a 6 to 7 day walk with little breaks at all. And if they stopped for a break or even anything, they would just be shot. So they literally just made them walk across Europe all the way to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in Germany, which she describes to be as like on the German border, almost in Holland. So that walk is absolutely crazy. The fact that they made that walk through those conditions with the same light clothing that had from Auschwitz. I mean, they pretty much had nothing. All these people were sick, had what's we call it, most people were sick. They had typhus and lice from the travel. It was horrible. So there was a huge epidemic going on. So she had lice, but she knew a woman in the hospital, so she helped her get rid of it, and she ended up working in the hospital for for a year before the British soldiers arrived in May of 1945. They arrived. They knew what was going on with the typhus and lice, so she said they all arrived in not hazmat suits because they didn't have those back then, but full body suits, and gave everyone medicine and food. And she said when people took the medicine and food, their stomachs were so empty that most of them just died because they couldn't handle the medicine because their body was so empty. She really attributes her survival to a miracle. I mean, she was just so grateful that like her and her husband both made it. Even she lost both kids. I mean, she talks about how in Poland pre-war she had 20 family members and she only made it out with four. Her husband, well, three. Her husband and her two nephews. And that's just unbelievable to think about. I mean, the pain that you have to hold is, crippling. She credits, the British soldiers for being respectful and giving them a way out. And post-war, so the English soldiers were actually ordered to fly the people in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp to Portugal. They said that they would be able to live there and work there and be free there. And she said no. She stayed because her and her husband had a plan. Before, when they were in the ghetto, they made a plan to always meet back in Krakow, Poland, if they survived. So she found a woman who she found a woman who knew other survivors, and got her together with 6 other people, 3 men and 3 women, some going to Poland, some going to Czechoslovakia, but all going in that same direction to travel with her. And they traveled on foot for about 2 weeks, she says, to a train station where she can go to Poland and meet with her husband. And they met, and then the she she went to the municipal building, I believe she says, like town hall, and she says, "Have you seen my husband?" to the lady at the front desk, and the lady says, "Your husband just walked out like an hour ago." So they ended up reuniting, and they went to go actually look at their old apartment, and they knocked on the door, and there was a woman in there, and she told him, "This is our old apartment, that's our bed, all this stuff," and she said, "Get out of here, you dirty Jew." She threatened to pour boiling hot water on them. She said she cried, but there's nothing they could do. They had her husband didn't have his factory, she didn't have any belongings. So they went to Vienna, and where they made a little money, got on their feet, and where they got safe passage to the United States. And in 1948, in the United States, they had another daughter, so that's some light. And they rented an apartment in Washington Heights, New York. So the one intriguing aspect of this is how she describes the pre-war relations between the Jews and the non-Jews in Poland was very good, but later tells the story of people she knows doing horrible things to Jews. So like, and one of the stories she explains is someone she grew up with, like tightly knit in the Jewish community, not Jewish though, obviously, was telling came up to her house, like knocked on her door just to tell her that he ran around and just punched or hit multiple Jews just for no reason, just running around hitting Jews. She said, "What? Like, why would you come tell me I'm Jewish?" She said, "Get out of here, never come back again." So it's just weird how he was like proud of just it's the way that's why I said it's extremely interesting to me how Hitler and the Nazis were able to manipulate the minds of regular people because a normal person just doesn't go out and do that. Like they really had to have this propaganda down to a science and manipulating these normal people. And I just can't believe it that you can manipulate someone to kill an innocent person for no reason, just based on like bullshit reasons, for a lack of a better word. And I have fear factor in there just because most people were scared of the Germans and really just, did it, did did horrible, horrible things just to stay alive, and ended up dying as well. So um, that's my presentation. And